It is August 1st, 2024, and in the aftermath of the attacks carried out by Israel this week that included the bombing of Beirut, in which they killed a Hezbollah commander, as well as the assassination of a Hamas political chief, a top Palestinian diplomat in Tehran, we are now seeing both Hezbollah and Iran vow that there will be a response. So, what is that response going to look like? What could it look like? And why is Netanyahu in a position of trying to escalate tensions in such a way that he is picking fights all around the axis of resistance, practically begging them to attack Israel? Yes, we know that the US has said that it would step in and quote unquote defend Israel. That much is clear. But is Netanyahu really willing to risk the demise of Israel in order to try to save his standing as its prime minister? Well, we discussed all that and more earlier with a special guest. So let's take a listen to that conversation now. Joining me now to discuss is Seyed Mohammad Marandi, a professor of English literature at the University of Tehran. Professor Marandi, thank you so much for taking the time to join me.
Thank you for inviting me.
Now, I want to get your take on the latest here, but I actually want to start off with getting your reaction on the latest escalations that we've seen from Israel. I mean, in a matter of hours, they bomb Beirut and kill a Hezbollah commander there, and then they assassinate a Palestinian diplomat, Hamas political chief Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran. Were you surprised to see Netanyahu's government pursue these escalations at this time?
No, I was expecting escalation. I didn't know what form it would take, but I've been of the belief for the last few weeks that the Israeli regime can't continue the war as it is, and they're not willing to have a ceasefire. So the only thing left would be escalation. And as you pointed out, the attack on Beirut, where they bombed a residential complex, and the assassination in Tehran, as well as the bombing of a civilian target in Yemen, in Al-Hodeidah, were all carried out in order to bring about escalation. And now here we are. There has been escalation. There will be a very harsh response from the collective axis, but the axis of resistance, but the Iranian response will be particularly harsh, and I think it will go beyond what we saw after the Israeli regime bombed the Iranian consulate building in Damascus.
Yeah, and I know that there's been a lot of comparisons drawn to what we saw back in April, where you had that initial Israeli attack, you had the Iranian response. And even now, I mean, we're seeing Israel claiming, oh, well, anyone who targets us, there will be a harsh response from us, as if they were not responsible for the initial attacks, which are now calling for retaliation. And as you pointed out there, it's not as if they just carried out one attack, right? They just targeted Hezbollah or they just targeted Hamas. No, you're talking about seem to be wanting to target the axis of resistance as a whole, almost begging for some sort of a response. And we heard from the Secretary General of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, earlier today. He said that Israel has crossed red lines and that the conflict has entered a new phase, unlike the previous one. What do you think he means by that?
It's quite clear that the response to the outrages, whether in Beirut or in Tehran or in Yemen, will be very severe. And Iran is determined to make sure that the Israeli regime regrets the terror attack in Tehran. Not only did they violate Iran's sovereignty, but they murdered an Iranian guest and the representative of the Palestinian people. So they will strike Israel very hard. And I think it's very clear that just as the Israeli regime has already lost the war, they've lost on the border with Lebanon, they've lost in Gaza, and they've lost in the Red Sea, where the Americans have been fighting on their behalf, but to no avail. They've lost on all fronts. They've lost in Syria and Iraq. But Netanyahu is not acting in the interests of the regime. He's acting for his own interests. And that's why he's brought about this escalation. Netanyahu is doing it to preserve his own power. And he's sacrificing the Israeli regime for his own sake, for his own selfish interests. So I think it's very clear that what we will be seeing in the coming days will be very painful to Israel. And they will be on the losing end. And many people will ask themselves, why then did Israel carry out this attack? The reason is that this is not being carried out for the sake of Israel. The escalation has been brought about for the sake of Netanyahu.
That's a great point, and I think something that, right, it defies logic in a way. You look at Netanyahu and you think, why would you, further put Israel in this position where now it is going to be targeted and attacked just to save yourself, right? How does that benefit you? But of course, he doesn't necessarily need logic, as we've seen with everything that he's done up until this point. But speaking about what Iran may do and what Iran could do, I know that, they're warning that there will be a response. What do you think that will look like? Is it likely that it'll be kind of similar to April when it comes to the timing? We see a little bit of time pass before there is a response. And what is at stake this time around?
I don't know how long it will take for the response to be carried out. I think it will be much more extensive and hard-hitting than what we saw after the strike on the consulate. And I think also Hezbollah will respond, and Yemen will respond, and so will the resistance in Iraq and Syria respond. So the Israelis are going to be hammered on multiple fronts, but obviously the Iranians are going to hit the hardest. Now, as I said earlier, Netanyahu is like a gambler. First, he gambles with his money, then he runs out of money. He gambles his what he has at home, and then he has to, ultimately he's going to have to, give up the house. Israel is being pushed towards destruction. I don't mean that it will collapse tomorrow or next week or 6 months from now, but after losing the war and after being discredited across the world, because the world sees the Israeli regime as genocidal, it sees how they're raping prisoners and how they're massacring children and women day and night. So it has no credibility. It has lost the battle on the battlefield. But by expanding the war, Israel will bring devastation upon itself. And that will mean that in future, Israelis in increasing numbers will leave, and no one will again invest in Israel because foreign investors will see that nowhere in the country is safe. So Israel has sealed its own fate through the actions of Netanyahu. Such a regime is no longer sustainable in the long term. So Iran's response will be decisive, and the response of the collective axis of resistance will be decisive. But I think, implications will be very long term for the regime. And also, many will ask, well, what happens after escalation? We already have escalation. The Israelis have assured, have made that, they have brought about that escalation. We are in a state of escalation now. The question is, what happens after the regime in Tel Aviv is punished? That is a question that people have to ask the Americans. If they rein in their dog in Tel Aviv, if they yank on the leash, then we will not see a regional war. If the Americans do the stupid thing and they get involved, they will lose everything in the region. They will be expelled from Iraq. Their bases in the Persian Gulf will be destroyed. And those regimes that gave those bases to the United States, they will be destroyed too, because they'll be seen as hostile. So if the Americans get involved in a regional war, then they're gone. It's over for them.
Yeah,
No
and
one in the region wants, and I should stress, none of us want a regional war. No one wants a regional war, because it will create misery across the world. It will bring about the collapse of the global economy, and the consequences will be beyond my comprehension. It's just beyond my imagination. However, the Israeli regime will be severely punished for what it has done over the last few days. There's no doubt about that. And Iran is not going to hold back. Iran is going to hit the regime hard. So everything depends on what the Americans do after the retaliation that comes from Tehran and the other members of the resistance alliance.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you bring up the US and kind of the role that they play in all of this because, given the fact that we are 10 months now, almost 10 months into Israel's ongoing bombardment and blockade of the Gaza Strip, their genocidal war against the Palestinian people there, the question always becomes, why hasn't the US stepped in and done more, right? Why hasn't the US forced Israel to stop? Why have they continued to provide the bombs? And even in a situation like this, where you have Israel carrying out all of these attacks, provoking multiple members of the axis of resistance, and yet you look to the US and our defense secretary here is saying, oh, well, the US will make sure that we help Israel to defend itself. And it's like, it's not about self-defense when you're the one carrying out all of these different attacks. And even on that note, I mean, here in the US, our current president has said he's not going to run again. Clearly, he's not in charge of US foreign policy at all. But the top two candidates, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, have made it clear that they are so supportive of Israel that is above and beyond anything else. So what are your concerns there when you see the way that the US is acting right now? And it doesn't seem as though it's going to try to rein Netanyahu in, especially after last week's visit, his trip to DC, where he got just a nauseating amount of applause and celebration by the US Congress.
The United States is destroying itself. This is a choice that they've made. The United States has revealed itself to the world that it is a barbaric and genocidal regime. They are just as guilty of genocide as the Israelis are, and mainstream Western journalists, Western politicians, Western elites, Western diplomats, they are all foot soldiers for genocide. They're all in this together, and the world sees this. The whole of the global South sees this. Even in the West, increasingly, despite Western mainstream media, young people are seeing the reality of the West. So what we saw in Congress was, I think, the greatest catastrophe possible for the United States, because the world watched them applaud a genocidal child killer, a person who allows prisoners to be raped in prison, a person who carries out terrorist acts in multiple countries. So the United States is on the decline, but today it no longer has any soft power whatsoever. And it's fighting on multiple fronts in Ukraine. It's increasing tensions with China. This is not sustainable. And ultimately, I think the United States, economically and politically, it has already been on the decline. But when it comes to human values and the image of the United States has been utterly destroyed. And the reason for all this is because Zionists are in charge. Whether it's Christian Zionists or Jewish Zionists or secular Zionists, doesn't matter. they're the ones who are destroying the United States. They're the ones in charge of what's going on in the United States and in Israel. They can be in the United States, they can be in Israel, they can be in Europe, wherever they are, they're the ones responsible. And they, of course, do not reflect Christianity. They don't reflect Jewish values. They don't, just as ISIS did not reflect Muslim values. But they are the ones who are destroying the United States. So the United States is being destroyed. Its image has already been destroyed, but the United States is being destroyed because of elements within the political establishment, because of wealthy donors, because of Zionism, because of the military-industrial complex. All of these combined are bringing down the United States and the empire in a very extraordinarily and fast way, something that we've never seen in history before. Usually empires take decades to fall, or centuries maybe to fall. But in the case of the United States, really, since the war in Iraq, I think the collapse of the empire has just been moving faster and faster.
Yeah, it's shocking to watch. And I think even just in the aftermath of this so-called war on terror that the US launched, and, we look back at Iraq and Afghanistan, and you think surely the US would learn from those. I guess you could call them failures. I don't know if they achieved what they necessarily wanted to achieve. They certainly didn't win any wars, right? There were no victories. And you watch the US now stirring up tensions with Russia and China and Iran. And meanwhile, all three of those countries are working together as they should. And the US acts as though these are all of these isolated conflicts, not realizing that when we're talking about a growing multipolar world, it's because of US foreign policy, because they have been the bully for so long, that you have other countries in the world going, we can't continue to survive like this. I mean, if the US was able to, whether it was Iran or Russia or one of these other countries that it has tried to target, if it was truly successful, then that harms everyone else in the world. Now, when it comes to where Iran stands, I also wanted to ask you about that, because I know that Iran has a new president, Masoud Pezeshkian, who was just inaugurated this week. And when it came to, what he had to say about the West, it seemed like he wanted the sanctions lifted, right? He wanted there to be more peace, at least from what I took from what I heard on the Western media of what they said about him. But how do you view him, and especially the timing of all of this, right? You have someone that comes in and suddenly he's dealing with all of these tensions with the first day on the job.
Well, nothing really has changed. No one in Iran wants sanctions. But it's the United States that has to change its policies. That's what President Pezeshkian has said. I find, from his public statements, I find his foreign policy to be identical, actually, to that of former President Raisi's. Because President Raisi's policy was to expand relations with the global South, with neighbors, and to join organizations such as BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and to explore opportunities to ease tensions with the West. And this is exactly what President Pezeshkian has been saying as well. When it comes to negotiations with the West, he did say very clearly that the West has to change its attitude. It has to change its behavior. Otherwise, we have other options. And that's exactly what President Raisi was saying as well. So I don't see any change taking place in Iran, but Iran is giving the opportunity to the West to change its behavior. Also, President Pezeshkian made a very strong speech during his inauguration ceremony in support of Palestine. And I think many people saw it. And the martyr of the Hamas movement, Mr. Haniyeh, he was in the audience, and he hugged the president after the speech. So Ismail Haniyeh he was with the president before he was martyred, and that made the president particularly angry, the fact that he was martyred. Just today, after the funeral ceremony for martyr Haniyeh, a reporter went up to the president and asked him how he feels, and he says, "I can't talk now." He was very emotional. So if the Americans think that Iran's policy towards Palestine is going to change, they're mistaken. If they think that Iran is going to give concessions over its legitimate and peaceful nuclear program, they're mistaken again. The only way forward for the Americans and the Europeans is to change policy towards Iran, but also to change policy towards the Palestinian people. The West has the elites in the West, the political establishment in the West has to recognize that Palestinians are human beings. So far, they don't accept that. They consider Palestinians to be subhuman. Otherwise, they wouldn't be supporting an ethno-supremacist regime that's carrying out a Holocaust. Once they consider Palestinians to be human beings, and once they recognize the rights of the Iranian people, then there can be change in the relationship.
Yeah, I know that there is certainly a lot at stake here all around, and I really appreciate you taking the time to join me today to break down all of the latest here. Seyed Mohammad Marandi, Professor of English Literature at the University of Tehran, thank you so much for your time and
Thank you
insight.
for having me.
If anything in this video resonated with you, be sure to like it, share it with your friends, leave a comment, and as always, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to keep up with all of my work, make sure that you're subscribed to my page on Substack. That's rachelblevins.substack.com. If you want to support my work, you can also check out my page on Patreon. That's patreon.com/rachelblevins. That's where you can sign up as a monthly paid subscriber and join the community there. As always, thank y'all so much for all of your support, and I'll see you next time.